Well, it's crazy. We're already at the end. I don't know about you. This has been an awesome series as we've been walking through the Gospel of Mark. If you remember all the way back, it was 13 weeks ago we started with John the Baptist baptizing Jesus and Jesus in the wilderness. If you haven't been with us, that's okay. We'll get you up to speed, but it's been quite the journey as we've followed the life of Jesus as told by the Gospel writer Mark. And here we're coming to the end. And so we're going to be wrapping up how Mark is telling early Christians about Jesus. This is his letter to the world saying, here is who this man is. Here's what I want you to know. And so we're going to see how he finishes it. And if you've seen a good movie or read a really good book that has a great ending, that's Mark. There's all sorts of twists and turns and a very powerful ending. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. Now, a couple people have talked to me this week. They did some math, and they asked me, some of these sermons we've looked at as few as like 8 verses, and we still have like 2 chapters left. I'm not going to make this a 2-hour sermon, so do not have any fear. But we're going to have a chance to really soak in Mark's words. And we're going to be walking through and get a big swath of how Mark wants to finish this. And so we'll be guiding along through that and navigating it, but we're going to really get to hear a lot of Mark today. So I'm just bracing you now. You're going to get to hear a lot of Scripture, which is a great thing. Before we continue where we left off, last week we finished in the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus is talking to his Heavenly Father and is confronted with the reality of having to take this wrath and this justice that is really meant for us, and yet he's asking God, please let this cup pass, but in the end, not my will, yours. I'm going to actually start off with a passage that was before that. It's in between the Last Supper and the garden. It didn't really fit with what we were talking about last time, but it plays into today. And so we're going to be starting here in Mark chapter 14, verse 27. This is pre-garden, but it leads into what goes on. So this is after the Last Supper. And Jesus said to them, "You will all fall away, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered. But after I am raised up, I will go before you to Galilee." Now these are jarring words, right? Because Jesus has just had the supper where he's given his followers his body, his blood. He's given everything he has to them. And then he tells them, just so you know, you're all going to abandon me. You're all going to leave me. And he quotes here the prophet Isaiah that the sheep are going to be scattered. They're going to, that the people he's leading are going to flee from him. But there's this promise, after I'm raised up, I will go before you to Galilee. So again, he's telling them, you're all going to leave me. That's not good. But after I come back, I'm going to see you in Galilee. I'll go before you and meet you there. Now Peter, being the leader of the disciples, he's kind of, in some ways, almost like a first among equals. He's the kind of the spokesperson, takes the initiative. He says to him, he's very bold. He says, even though they all fall away, I will not. I love that. Can you imagine if you're in a group and somebody told you, like, you're all going to leave me. And then one person's like, all right, they might, but not me. Right? It's kind of like, I feel like he's throwing them under the bus a little bit. Like, Jesus, even if everyone else leaves you, I won't. So Jesus replies, and Jesus said to him, truly I tell you, this very night, before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. But he said emphatically, if I must die with you, I will not deny you. And they all said the same. So this is a passage some of us might be very familiar with, but Jesus is telling Peter, right? You think you're so cool, right? You think you're so strong. Think you're not going to fall away? Let me tell you, before you hear a rooster crow twice, you're not going to just deny me once, not a little slip up, not twice, 3 times, right? If once is like a little, caught off guard, twice is an accident, 3 is, this is terrible. But Peter doesn't believe it. He says emphatically, I'll stake my life on it. If I have to die with you, Jesus, I'll do whatever it takes. And all the other disciples say the same, right? We're with you to the end, no matter what. Right? That's their statement. Now, this leads straight into the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus prays, and then he's arrested. He's betrayed by Judas, one of the 12, and now he's being taken to the Jewish leaders to see what they would do with him. So we're going to jump forward now. We're skipping over the garden, and this is post-Jesus' arrest. And they led Jesus to the high priest, and all the chief priests and the elders and the scribes came together. All right, so again, remember, he's being arrested for what he's done against the Jewish community, the establishment. They're the ones who have a big issue with him at this point because he's claiming to be the Messiah. He's claiming all these things about himself, and he's shaking this whole system that they've built up. And so the religious leaders, they're the ones who are going to they're the ones who have this big issue. So he's arrested, and he's brought to the high priest. So, I mean, this would be like the equivalent if you were on trial in the Catholic Church going before the Pope, right? This is the top notch. Like, this is a big deal. They're all coming together to talk about what's going on. Now, the chief priests and the whole council were seeking testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but they found none. For many bore false witness against him, but their testimony did not agree. Now, this feels a little bit like poor planning to me. I don't know. If I was to try and, sabotage the Son of God, I'm not going to. They arrest him, they bring him in front of the chief priests, and they want a testimony, right? Let's get some eyewitness accounts. What has he done that deserves punishment? And Mark tells us flat out that they couldn't find any because there's all these false witnesses, right? They're making stuff up that didn't happen, and even those don't agree with one another. Like, can you at least talk before you get up there? Like get your story straight. But they keep making all these stories. Oh, he did this, and I heard him say this. But all of it's made up, and they don't even align. It's so evident that this man is not guilty of what he's being accused of. But he's on trial right now. I mean, you can picture like a court setting. He's the defendant, and here are all these witnesses attacking him, but their stories aren't lining up. And some stood up and bore false witness against him, saying, "We heard him say, 'I will destroy this temple that is made with hands, and in 3 days I will build another not made with hands.' Yet even about this, their testimony did not agree." So we have we're getting an example of one of these false testimonies. They're accusing Jesus of saying he's going to destroy the temple. He's saying, the holy temple, the place of God's presence that you love so much, they're accusing him of claiming that he's going to destroy it. Now, what we find in the other gospel lessons, what Jesus actually said is, if you destroy this temple, I will build it back in 3 days. And we're told that the temple he's referring to is his body. But at no point is Jesus ever saying, I'm going to destroy the temple. Right? Actually, if we remember, when Jesus entered the temple, he was outraged because people were defiling it. So the furthest thing from the truth is that Jesus wants to just destroy it on his own. But again, here, you see, even then they don't agree. Where did he say it? How did he say it? What is his intent? All of these witnesses are all over the place. They can't agree on anything. And the high priest stood up in the midst and asked Jesus, "Have you no answer to make? What is it that these men testify against you?" But he remained silent and made no answer. And again the high priest asked him, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed?" Now again, I want to go back to think of a courtroom, right? You have a defendant. Maybe you've seen accounts or seen a movie, right, where there's somebody on trial, and there's some witness that's just outrageous, right? And you can see the defendant saying, like, no, that's not true, right? And they're trying to defend themselves. Jesus is getting false accusation after false accusation. It's just a field day. Everyone's got a story about how terrible Jesus is. And his response is silence. Right? He has every reason to say, no, okay, hold up. You weren't even there. No, that's not how that conversation went. But he just sits there. He just lets them accuse him. And so eventually the high priest is so frustrated, he just asks him flat out, right? All these accusations, are you the Christ, right? Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed? And Jesus said, I am. And you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. So he's silent. Finally, they just flat out ask Jesus, right? If you're not going to try and defend yourself, tell me this. Are you the Christ? Are you the Messiah? Yeah. And not just that, you're going to see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power. And this is a very explicit reference. You see, and we've talked about this before, especially the religious leaders of this day. What we know as the Old Testament, that's their scripture. And the religious leaders, they know this back and forward. They would recite this throughout their day. And this is an allusion to a very, very prominent prophecy of what is to come from the book of Daniel. So if you look at Daniel chapter 7, Daniel gets this vision. He says, I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the cloud of heaven there came one like a son of man. And he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him, and to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. So they asked Jesus, are you the Christ? And he says, not only am I the Christ, but I'm the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven. Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven, where is that? It's a prophecy of this person coming, that Daniel gets this vision of, who's going to be presented before God, right? This messianic figure who is actually going to be given dominion and glory and kingdom over all the world, and shall never be taken away. Now just think for a second the irony of this, right? So Jesus is on trial, and what he basically tells them is, actually, I'm the eternal judge. Right? You're throwing these accusations, but in the end, I'm the one who is going to have dominion, glory, and kingdom. Right? In the midst of this, right, you feel like you have all this power, you think you got me in this trap, and even despite all of that, I'm the Messiah. I have the power. Now, if you're a high priest, how do you think you'd respond to that? If you answered not good, you're right. And the high priest tore his garments and said, I mean, he's just, seriously, so frustrated, he just rips his clothes. It's blasphemy. What further witness do we need? You have heard his blasphemy. What is your decision? And they all condemned him as deserving death. And some began to spit on him and to cover his face and to strike him, saying to him, prophecy. And the guards received him with blows. So Jesus finally speaks, and he speaks the truth. Are you the Christ? I am. I'm the Son of Man who will be coming on the clouds to judge the living and the dead. And their response is, all right, that's all we need, right? Because for them, there's no way that he could be this. This is making himself God. This is making himself be something that they cannot fathom him being. And so that alone deserves death. They all condemn him. But they don't just, this is what I'd call a corrupt establishment. They're not just like taking him away and like, all right, hand him over to the authorities. Even after they've condemned him to death, right? He's got a death sentence on him from them. But they're spitting on him. They're striking him. They're beating him. And even the guards are receiving him with blows. And so every step along the way that he's going to be making in what we're reading, he's being physically abused, verbally mocked. This is a dark day for Jesus. Now we're going to scene change here. So we were with Jesus in this courtroom setting, this trial. We're now jumping out. And as Peter was below in the courtyard, okay, so that's happening in the temples. They're talking. Outside, you have Peter. One of the servant girls of the high priest came, and seeing Peter warming himself, she looked at him and said, you also were with the Nazarene Jesus. But he denied it, saying, I neither know nor understand what you mean. And he went out into the gateway, and the rooster crowed. So Peter is following along. He's trying to see what's happening. He's trying to keep an eye on things. But he's warming himself. This is nighttime. It's very explicit. They arrested Jesus at night because there were so many people who believed in Jesus that to take him during the daytime would cause a riot. So they have to do it in the cover of night when nobody's paying attention. So it's nighttime. Peter is outside, but it's cold. He's warming himself by a fire, and a servant girl who has been kind of around this whole scene, who listens to the high priest, serves him, sees Peter and says, wait a minute, I think I saw you with that Jesus guy, that Nazarene. And, as Jesus foretold, Peter denies it. Now you think about what Jesus is experiencing in there, right? He's being beaten for nothing. He's being mocked. So Peter all of a sudden realizes if I'm associated with that, this is not going to go well. And so in this kind of panic moment, he completely denies him, right? I neither know nor understand what you mean. So I have no idea. Jesus guy, never heard of him. He goes out into the gateway and the rooster crowed. So he kind of realizes I shouldn't stay right here to be recognized. And you're the first crow. You think like, Peter, don't let it crow twice. Pay attention. And the servant girl saw him and began again to say to the bystanders. So now, instead of talking to him, she's talking to everyone else. Like, wait a minute, do you see that guy? This man is one of them. But again, he denied it. Number 2. And after a little while, the bystanders again said to Peter, certainly you are one of them, for you are a Galilean. I love that. So part of the reason that tips him off is he's clearly not from Jerusalem. I mean, probably best bet is his accent. And so I guess, again, if you're going to deny Jesus, get a good accent to like hide yourself. Just kidding. That's not a takeaway for today. I get kicked out of being a pastor real quick. So Peter gives himself away. Something about how he presents himself, probably his accent, maybe his appearance, how he talks. They know you're clearly not part of the Jerusalem crowd. Again, this is at nighttime. And we know Jesus is from up in Galilee, so there's a good chance that you're with him. And then we have here, Peter begins to invoke a curse on himself and to swear, I do not know this man of whom you speak. This is a big deal. Invoking a curse on yourself is not just like a little fib. This is, God strike me down if I'm lying kind of language. That's how intense Peter's willing to go to protect himself here. Begins to swear, I do not know this man of whom you speak. And immediately the rooster crowed a second time. And Peter remembered how Jesus had said to him, before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. And he broke down and wept. Man, those times when you get caught, right? When you realize you're in the wrong, you're flustered and you're going, all of a sudden, it all came true. And all of a sudden this guilt just overwhelms Peter. And all he can do is just cry, right? Because if you think about, again, Jesus told his disciples, you're going to scatter, you're going to leave me. But they didn't want to believe it. No, we'll go to the death for you, Jesus, right? We'll do whatever it takes to stand by you. And all of a sudden to realize how wrong you were. And that this person you swore your life to, you've now denied to cover your own hide. And so he just breaks down crying. We're going to scene change again. That's all we're going to see for Peter right now. We're going to go back to Jesus. And as soon as it was morning, the chief priests held a consultation with the elders and scribes and the whole council. And they bound Jesus and led him away and delivered him over to Pilate. And Pilate asked him, are you the king of the Jews? And he answered him, you have said so. So, likely, right, they're doing this in the middle of the night, but not everyone's awake, right? A lot of the people, the movers and shakers that they need to consult with are not awake yet. So they wait till morning, now that they're kind of in consensus. They gather with all the elders, the scribes, and they bind him up and they deliver him over to Pilate. Because in this setup, the Jews don't have the ability to put somebody to death. They're under Roman occupation. Rome's the one who has the death penalty, and the Jews are forbidden to kill. And so they realize that if they want Jesus crucified, which is what they want, they need the Romans, they need Pilate to be the one to do it. Now Pilate asked Jesus, right? Okay, there's all these accusations. Are you the king of the Jews? And all Jesus says, again, he's not defending himself. He just says, you've said so. Right? Just by asking the question, yeah, what you just said is true. And so, again, religious leaders don't love this. And the chief priests accused him of many things. And Pilate again asked him, have you no answer to make? See how many charges they are bringing against you. But Jesus made no further answer, so that Pilate was amazed. So again, now all of those stories that they were riling up, now they're sharing them with Pilate. Oh, he did this, and he said this, and he's done all of these terrible things. And again, Pilate's never seen somebody on, essentially a death trial, right? This is going to put you to death, who just stands there, who just lets them say whatever they want. And he flat out asked them, are you not going to say anything? Like, listen, there's a dozen of them, right? 2 dozen. Who knows how many accusations being made? But Jesus makes no further answer. So, are you the king of the Jews? You've said so. And he's silent. That's all he wants you to hear. So we continue. Now at the feast, he used to release for them one prisoner for whom they asked. And among the rebels in prison who had committed murder in the insurrection, there was a man called Barabbas. And the crowd came up and began to ask Pilate to do as he usually did for them. All right, so we're celebrating Passover here. That's the context of this whole situation. And as kind of a goodwill nature, the Roman government, right, which is currently occupying the nation of Israel, occupying the Jewish people of Judea, one of the things they would do in kind of celebration to kind of keep the peace is that on this big celebration day, they would release one prisoner. Like, look how nice we are. We're setting one free, kind of a goodwill offering. You try and do a nice gesture to kind of keep everyone content. And so there's one of these people we're told about called Barabbas, who is part of an insurrection, so a rebellion against the government, and has committed murder. So not a good guy. And so the people come to Pilate, right? It's that time. We get to ask for one prisoner to be set free. And Pilate says to them, saying, do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews? For he perceived that it was out of envy that the chief priests had delivered him up. But the chief priests stirred up the crowd to have him released for them, Barabbas instead. So the way Mark tells this, right, all Pilate's thinking is, I think these religious leaders have an issue with this Jesus guy, but once I ask the people, I think it'll be fine. If you remember Palm Sunday, everyone's like praising him, like he seems like a pretty popular dude. I'm sure if I ask the crowd, if you want me to release this Jesus guy, this king of the Jews, I'm sure that they'll kind of get me out of the situation, right? 'Cause I can't find a fault in him, but I'll offer this. So all he offers here in Mark's account is king of the Jews, right? Jesus. Do you want me to release Jesus? Now the chief priests, they're stirring up in the crowd. So they're going around and trying to, get a chant going, and they're convincing people and talking to them. And so instead, the crowd starts to ask them to release Barabbas instead. Now, again, just think about this. Pilate didn't offer Barabbas. What a slap in the face. This innocent man, do you want me to release this innocent man? No, we'll take that murderer instead, right? That's who they're choosing. The chief priests are doing all of this, but the people are complicit in it. And Pilate again said to them, "Then what shall I do with the man you call the King of the Jews?" And they cried out again, "Crucify him." So then what do you want me to do with Jesus, right? If you want this murderer free, what should I do with this guy? I want him crucified. Right? And there's a lot of things you can read, and if you're curious about more, crucifixion is a very unpleasant way to die. Right? It is not a quick and easy way. Its intention is a slow death that brings humiliation. It's in a public space where everyone can see how terrible you are. It's to deter other people from doing the same. You basically suffocate to death on your own blood. This is terrible. This is what they want of Jesus. And Pilate said to them, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they shouted all the more, "Crucify him." So Pilate, wishing to satisfy the crowd, released for them Barabbas, and having scoured Jesus, he delivered him to be crucified. So Pilate asked them again, "Why?" But in the end, the people say, "No, crucify him and give us Barabbas. Give us the murderer." And it was the third hour when they crucified him. So the hours in this time are from 6 o'clock. So third hour is 9 o'clock in the morning. And the inscription of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." And with him they crucified 2 robbers, one on his right and one on his left. And those who passed by derided him, wagging their heads and saying, "Aha, you who would destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself and come down from the cross." Right? He's even dying. He's actively dying, and they're still mocking him and saying, "Hey, you did all these cool things, and you talk a big game. Look where you are now," right? And so also the chief priests with the scribes mocked him to one another, saying, "He saved others. He cannot save himself. Let the Christ, the King of Israel, come down now from the cross, that we may see and believe." Those who were crucified with him also reviled him. I just want to point out a little bit of irony. All right, and the word ironic gets used in a lot of ways. Most of them probably not true to the definition. But one form of irony is when you're reading something and the reader knows something that the characters don't. Now, what they don't know is that if he comes down, then he's not the Christ. Because the Christ came to be a ransom for many. And so they're saying, if you're the Christ, come down. But that would be the least Christ thing to do. Right? But they're mocking him. Even these others that are crucified with him are mocking him at this point. When the 6th hour, so 12 o'clock had come, there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. And at the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, "Eloi, Eloi, lema sabachthani," which means, my God, why have you forsaken me?" So from about 12 to 3 o'clock, it's just dark. Right? This is middle of the day. Right? This is not just a little cloud passing by. But there's this supernatural darkness that comes across and this great tragedy that's going on. And as this time comes, Jesus cries aloud to God in this very intimate, vulnerable language. "God, why have you left me? Right? Why have you just forsaken me here?" And some of the bystanders hearing it said, "Behold, he is calling to Elijah." And someone ran and filled a sponge with sour wine, putting it on a reed and gave it to him to drink, saying, "Wait, let us see whether Elijah will come to take him down." So Elijah, the EL part of a lot of Hebrew names comes from the word for God. ELL is short for God, and so that's why my God sounds a lot like Eloi, sounds a lot like Elijah. And so these people aren't sure what he's saying. He's on the cross. I don't know how well they know Aramaic, the language he's probably speaking. But they're oh, okay, now he seems pretty desperate. He's calling to Elijah to help, and let's see if Elijah bails him from this, if he really is special. And Jesus uttered with a loud cry and breathed his last, and the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. So we started this series, right? This man named Jesus comes, and he's baptized, and God opens the sky, says, "This is my son," and we've seen him do all these miracles. And for all intents and purposes, to everyone watching, this right here, verse 37, is the end of the story. All right. Another Messiah movement, that's over. breathed his last, and he died. Now what's fascinating here is this next verse. And when the centurion, so a Roman soldier who would have been responsible for overseeing his death, who stood facing him, saw that in this way he breathed his last, he said, "Truly this man was the Son of God." This Roman soldier sees this happen, sees Jesus cry out, breathe his last, and all of a sudden says, "This was the Son of God." Now, this is one of those things where it's beautiful whenever you get to walk through a whole book of the Bible, because one thing that I've been teasing a little bit as we've gone through the series is the identity of Jesus. Because if you remember, Jesus typically tells people in the book of Mark not to talk about what he's doing. I want to bring you back to chapter 1, verse 1. This was the first thing that we read in the book of Mark. In the beginning of the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. 1:1. Here in 1539, we have somebody saying this was the Son of God. Do you know how many humans identified him as the Son of God between 1:1 and 1539? 0. You have examples like this, right? So Jesus heals this girl. She gets up, begins walking. Everyone's amazed in verse 43, and he strictly charged them that no one should know this, right? Don't tell them what I just did. Chapter 7, we have this man who's deaf and mute. He's released, and all of a sudden he's healed. He can speak plainly, and Jesus charged them, tell no one, right? Don't talk about it. Chapter 8, you have Peter with this beautiful confession. So I'm going to pick up right here. Who do people say that I am? And they told him, John the Baptist. Others say Elijah, and others one of the prophets. And he asked them, but who do you say that I am? Peter answered him, you are the Christ, right? You're the Messiah. And he strictly charged them to tell nobody about him. So over and over in the book of Mark, Jesus is doing healings. Don't tell anyone. Jesus, you're the Messiah. Don't tell anyone. The one thing that nobody identified until now was that Jesus was the Son of God. And it wasn't until the very moment that he died on a cross that somebody finally got it. And that's because if you want to know Jesus, you have to see the crucified Jesus. You see, people loved healer Jesus. Look at all these things he's given me. My life is getting so good, and my life's changed. That's great. Jesus, you're the Messiah. You've come to restore Israel's fortune. That's great. But those aren't the whole story, because if all you want is a king or all you want is a healer or somebody to give you good things, then he's not the guy. If you want Jesus, you need that Jesus. You need the Jesus who is willing to die. You need the Jesus who is willing to come and to be mocked and beaten and shamed for your sake. Not just what else he gives. Now, is Jesus a healer? 100%. Is Jesus the King and the Lord? Definitely. But you can't skip past that Jesus, because that's the Jesus that we really see who the Son of God is. And Mark, it's jarring when this centurion makes this confession, because the whole time nobody gets this until Jesus breathes his last, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, there he is. That's the one who came. And so, continuing on, it's going to feel like the story is going to resolve here. We're going to see kind of the remainder of what happens in the crucifixion and continuing forward here in chapter 15. And there were also women looking on from a distance, among whom were Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of James the younger, and of Joseph and of Salome. When he was in Galilee, they followed him and ministered to him, and there were also many other women who came up with him to Jerusalem. All right, so we're told this really interesting fact that we have these 3 women identified along with others who came from Galilee. So Jesus, in his teaching, they started to follow him. And so now we're told that, hey, they're here at this crucifixion too. And when evening had come, since it was the day of the preparation, that is the day before the Sabbath, Joseph of Arimathea, a respected member of the council, who was also himself looking for the kingdom of God, took courage and went to Pilate and asked him for the body of Jesus. So again, you think of this council, right? They've been doing everything they can to kill Jesus. But you have Joseph here, who is a respected member of the council, but who's looking for the coming of God and realizes, wait, I don't think we got this right. And so he takes courage, goes against kind of everyone else in his circle, and he goes to Pilate and asks for the body. Now Pilate was surprised to hear that he should have died already. And summoning the centurion, he asked him whether or not he was already dead. And when he learned from the centurion that he was dead, he granted the corpse to Joseph. So Pilate's shocked. Crucifixion is not meant to be a fast death. And the fact that Jesus died so quickly is shocking to Pilate. And a lot of people point to this as just an example of what Jesus must have been experiencing. It wasn't just physical pain, but a spiritual weight that none of us can comprehend. Pilate is surprised, but asks the centurion, his job is to make sure people die, right? So he's an expert at this. He says, yeah, he's dead. So Joseph gets the body. And Joseph brought a linen shroud, and taking him down, wrapped him in the linen shroud and laid him in the tomb that had been cut out of the rock. And he rolled a stone against the entrance of the tomb. Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, saw where he was laid. So it's interesting here. Sabbath is coming. You can't do anything on Sabbath. And so there's preparations for the body, but all they have time to do right now is to get him into this tomb, to put a rock over the entrance. But you have these two Marys who see where he's laid, right? They're still kind of hanging around. And so you're wondering, right, the disciples they've scattered, right? They're looking from afar. They've abandoned him. And you're wondering if these women maybe are picking up on something that nobody else has. Because 3 days later, when the Sabbath was passed, so Sunday morning, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so that they might go and anoint them. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. So you're thinking maybe, at least this was me, you're thinking like, oh, maybe they get it, right? Jesus said he would rise on the third day. They looked where he was buried, and on the third day they go to the tomb. But we're told that they came to anoint him, which means they came to find a dead body. Again, Sabbath was coming. They don't have time for the proper preparations. And so even these women, they're honoring him, but they're coming to anoint his body for burial. They weren't able to do it beforehand. They ran out of time, and so now they're preserving it and doing these things. So Sunday morning, Easter morning, the sun had risen. They went to the tomb. And they were saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance of the tomb?" And looking up, they saw that the stone had been rolled back. It was very large. So they're walking, and they're kind of like, all right, does anyone know who's going to roll the stone away? Because it's big, and it's... Mark's writing is so funny. I just love it. They looked up, they saw the stone had been rolled away. It was very large. That's just Mark's style. He's kind of choppy in his own way like that, but it's good. So they're shocked. The stone is rolled away, right? The whole time they're trying to figure out who's going to do this, and it's already done. And entering the tomb, they saw a young man sitting on the right side, dressed in a white robe, and they were alarmed. Now, Mark just tells us, right, he's a young man, but the only other place we've ever seen white clothing like this in the Gospel of Mark is Jesus on the Transfiguration, when we're told that his clothes was whiter than anyone could bleach it. And so we're told that there's something supernatural about this man, which is why the church has always understood this to be an angel. So they look into the tomb, and all they see is this angel sitting there, and they're kind of concerned. It's not what we're expecting. We were trying to, anoint Jesus' dead body. And he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who is crucified. He has risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him." And so he acknowledged, right? I know you're coming for Jesus, kind of hints at his supernaturalness. He knows exactly what's going on. And he acknowledged it's the same Jesus, right, who was crucified. This isn't a new Jesus. This isn't something else. But this one who was crucified, that you watched die and watched get buried, he has risen. He is not here. The angel continues and says, "But go tell his disciples and Peter that he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." Now, a few things here. First off, tell his disciples, right? Don't keep this to yourself. Go let the other disciples know. But notice who gets called out. Peter. Peter's a disciple. You don't need to specify that. That's like saying, hey, go tell the whole family and dad. It's like, whole family works, right? But I think that Mark is hinting at here that right, when we started this, we started reading how Peter was going to deny and did deny, right? And as you're reading this, you have every reason to expect that Jesus would be totally justified in kicking Peter out, right? You denied me, right? You had your shot. You actually had 3 shots to not deny me. And yet, this good news that Jesus has risen is for Peter too. There's still hope. And so now, right, in that first thing that we read, Jesus said, "When I rise, I will go before you to Galilee." And so the angel says, he is going before you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. And if there is one thing that you could take as the theme of the Gospel of Mark, it is just as he told you. Jesus says things and they happen. Jesus says, "Be healed," and people are healed. He says, if you're going to this town, you're going to find a donkey, and you find the donkey. What Jesus says happens. And Jesus foretold his death. He said, "I'm going to be handed over. I'm going to be mocked. I'm going to be killed on the cross." It all happened. But he also said, I'm going to rise from the dead, and I'm going to go before you in Galilee. And this angel saying, he's risen. He's before you in Galilee. Now what's really interesting, where we're going to end today, is verse 8. And they went out and fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. And you think that is a terrible ending. It's like, what? This big triumphant. He's risen. Go tell everyone and go to Galilee. Jesus is waiting for you. And the women, their initial response is just terror. What? They're not expecting this, right? They came to anoint a body. And so for a while, they're not going to tell anyone because they're terrified. And it feels like a really weird place to end, but what I want to drive home today is that as we read the book of Mark, we just went through this whole narrative that Mark has laid out. When you leave the book of Mark, this is what happens. We are left in the same position as the women, with either the possibility to believe or not believe that Jesus rose. Because the women are told, hey, everything that he's ever said came true, and now he's risen. Go act like it. Go tell people. Go find him. It's happened. And as you read the Gospel of Mark, you hear story after account of Jesus doing things and they come true, and you get to the end and you're left with this promise. He's risen. Go tell people, right? Go live like it. Go act like this matters. And so we're in the same shoes as these women. And I just can't stress enough how important this detail is that Jesus rose. Like as Christians, we emphasize so much that Jesus died, and we talked about, right? You can't have a Jesus without a crucified Jesus. But it is equally important that he rose. Paul at one point says that if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, then Christians should be pitied because we're just chasing after false hope. We're just trying to comfort ourselves with some nice news. But if he did rise, then everything's changed. Right? And Mary earlier, when she was introducing the Apostles' Creed, talked about people have been saying these words for a long time. I mean, it's remarkable when you think of this confession, right? So we know that these women go on to tell people, right? Because we have this gospel today. If nobody told anyone, the whole message of Jesus would have died out. But they went and they told people what had happened. They told people of Jesus' life. They told people of how he died, what it meant, and they told people that he rose. And people believed it, and they shared the story, and they passed it on. And that Apostles' Creed, people have been confessing that creed for nearly 2,000 years. Countless languages, countless countries, corners of the world. That story of Jesus has carried on. And so, by reading this, we are brought into it. We realize this is not just some nice, oh man, that was entertaining. Oh, that's really interesting, or maybe even inspiring. This is reality, right? Because if Jesus did not rise, then his life and death mean nothing. But if he did rise, they mean everything. If Jesus just died, then it's pointless. Then everything we do here on a Sunday morning wouldn't matter. Everything we do in our life wouldn't matter, frankly. But if he did rise, then it means that everything he says is trustworthy. It means that he is the Son of Man who's going to come back to judge the living and the dead, that he's going to have an eternal kingdom, right? It means that when he says that you are now his child, that it's true. It means that when you were baptized, that the same death and resurrection that Jesus experienced, you've been baptized into that. You have been grafted into this story. And that story has been continuing on from the time that the book of Mark ended. Jesus rose, the church has carried it forward, and now we get to carry it on in today's world. And so we're left like these women with a chance to go and tell people, this is how the world is. Let me tell you about this man who did miraculous things and rose from the dead. Who does that? And so, as we finish the Gospel of Mark, it is the end, right? But it's also the beginning. Because we know how the grand story is going to finish. We know that Jesus is going to return one day. And as death couldn't hold Jesus down, death's not going to hold us down either. That we have this promised future of resurrection just like Jesus experienced. And so in the interim, we live it. We tell people the story of the whole world, the story of Jesus, the story of what he's continued to do in us and the blessings he's given, and the story of where we're going. And we invite people to believe that same story. We invite people to see that in Jesus' resurrection, everything clicks together. That this is the world as we know it. And so knowing that Jesus is risen, knowing that he is Lord, we spend each day rejoicing. What a gift. That story that God has crafted, that he's written into humanity, that he's brought me into it, that I get to be a character, that I don't have to figure life out on my own. We get to live every day saying, Lord, what would you have me do? What would my next decision be? How would you have me love? And anytime we doubt, anytime we struggle, we are reminded that this is the story we're baptized into. This is who we are. We never have to walk alone. Never have to figure it out for ourselves. So as we finish, I hope you see that this is really just the beginning. And I don't know what's going to happen in this life, and I know that the Jesus who was crucified means that in this life we're going to experience our own cross. It might be filled with suffering, but in the end it's going to be filled with glorious victory and resurrection. And may that hope sustain you throughout the whole story of your life and the story until Jesus returns one day to restore everything. And it's in his name that we gather, we meditate, and we rejoice. Amen.